Hi folks, welcome to this episode of the Physical Education Podcast. I think it's episode 38. I should have checked. 38 or 39. In any case, welcome. This week in the newsletter we talked about sort of trying to kind of ask you where you draw the line. So what sort of principles or standards do you have for yourself that allow you to create boundaries and create standards by which you live by? And this is sort of, I think this is actually the bigger issue with all of this that's going on. So my concern currently with everything with COVID is that the world is kind of being shaped in a new way. We're being policed and controlled in ways that I think are not proportionate to the threat of COVID. And what concerns me is, like, we can get into the whole masks versus no masks or whatever. Like, there's all these divisive things that we can be divided along, and there are legitimate discussions on all of these things, and that's fine. But I think ultimately we need to get to the bottom of, and this is an individual process that we all need to engage in, we need to ask ourselves, how far is too far? So essentially what you see is, and this is painting with broad strokes, you'll see people who will say, well, it's just a mask, just go along with it. We just got to band together, hold firm, and all these things. We just got to stand together and get through this. And then there are people on the other end, and if I'm not so far down that end, but if I had to pick a side, I'd be more on that side. And that is a side of, there is a great level of social engineering occurring at the moment, sort of with the aid of I guess the COVID pandemic. The saying in politics is, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And whatever way you want to look at everything that's happened, whether it happened just by accident, that doesn't really matter. I don't think we need to get into that. But in any case, whether by design or whether it was done on purpose, whatever, people are not letting this opportunity go to waste in terms of shaping the world in a slightly different way that is going to be of benefit to them. And I think a lot of that is pretty negative. I think it's trending towards more control. So more control of corporations, more control of governments, and less individual freedoms. So that's the overall trend, and the degrees to which that is happening is what we can debate. But I think it's that some of that is just down to personal preference. We all have different political beliefs. We all have, some people just want to be left alone. They want zero taxation, and then other people want to do things a slightly different way, and that's fine. We can all feel slightly differently about that. The issue, I think, is when you no longer have a choice. So I'm always going to tend towards the side of freedom, of individual freedom. You live the life you want to live, and if you want to do something differently, if you want to go along with anything else, that's fine. You do that, as long as I can do what I'm doing. Again, as long as I'm not hurting anyone. And that's this crucial bit, because the whole, as long as you're not hurting someone else. And obviously now with COVID, people can kind of feel justified in restricting individual liberties under the guise of protecting others, because they can be like, look, you have to do this, because if you don't, you're going to harm others. I think that's a bit overblown. We can get into that. I'll expand on that later, but I think, if you're going to do that, then you need to, if you want to police people's behaviors and actions in this COVID context, and if you think that's acceptable, then you should be consistent and believe that you should be able to control all other aspects of people's decisions, the foods they eat and so on. And I think most people don't actually want that, and they haven't really thought about it because they don't really have consistent standards. They don't really think about these things. They just kind of go along with it. And so that's this sort of crux, and this thing that you need to ask yourself is, as all of this has unfolded, what questions have you been asking yourself? Have you just gone along with it because you've evaluated it and decided that these restrictions are acceptable? Or, which I think is more likely for most of us, including myself to some degree, less and less now, but what is more likely is that we've kind of gone along with it because, what else are you going to do? You're just going to go along with it because we're all going along with it, and you don't want to be the person who's not. You don't want to be the other. You don't want to be the person who stands out. Now the person who chooses not to wear a mask stands out. They're sort of brandished in that sense. And this is without getting into, whether you think that's acceptable or not for someone to not wear a mask or to take a stand in that sense. But the fact that we have these identifiers now, these visual identifiers, and you can judge someone, and you can segregate someone, you can make them the other through this thing. And again, whether by design or just by happenstance, I don't think we need to get too bogged down in that. That's the reality. So the kind of simplest way I've thought of kind of illustrating this is if you imagine a ruler. So a ruler that goes from 0 to 100 centimeters in centimeter increments. And so 0 would be complete freedom. You live your life exactly the way you want to live it. There are no restrictions imposed on you whatsoever. Or maybe, no restrictions placed on you as long as you don't hurt others. Whatever way you want to think about it. That doesn't really matter. The point is the visual of the ruler. And then on the opposite end, at the 100 centimeter mark, we have complete control over every aspect of your life. The amount of time you are allowed outside, the amount of time you get to sleep, the amount of media that you get to consume, the type of media, whatever it is. You could say that the 100 centimeter mark, the far end on the right of the ruler, is sort of an Orwellian 1984 nightmare, and then at the 0 centimeter starting point of the ruler, that is complete, libertarianism and anarchy, which anarchy isn't a bad thing. It's well, you might think it's a bad thing, but it's not chaos. That's not what it means. It just means no leaders, no arbitrary leaders. But anyway, that's a separate topic. But these are the two extreme points of our ruler. And so what I want you to kind of think of is, at what point in these centimeter increments, at what point does it become too far? So as what's been happening with all the pandemic restrictions and everything that's been happening, we've been edging towards the authoritarian side of things. And you can argue that a certain amount of that is reasonable, is fine given the crisis, and that's fine. But at what point do you go too far? What is the centimeter increment at which there is a line that we should not cross? I think it's really, really important for everyone to consider what that line is. And it may be different for different people. It's absolutely going to be different for different people. Like for me, the line has been crossed already. And things are, practically speaking, are actually fairly relaxed here. We are in a lockdown, but there's a lot of things you can still do. And I think a lot of people could live their lives without really noticing that there's much of a restriction. So, to be fair, but personally for me, that line has been crossed. We've gone too far. They're asserting too much control, which I think is arbitrary control and arbitrary restrictions over things that I have no reason to believe that they actually care about based on their actions rather than what they say. But it's very important that you take some time and consider how far is too far, because what tends to happen, and this is what I referred to in one of the newsletters where I talked about, what happened in Nazi Germany, and this was this quote from a gentleman who had lived through all that, and he was basically saying, like, you expect it to come sort of all at once. Like, if the most severe restriction or most severe event had happened immediately, everyone would have been up in arms. So this is also what I referred to. Like, if back in March we'd been told, look, we're going to be on and off in lockdown, your businesses are going to close down, a lot of people are going to be out of work, some people are going to commit suicide, other health conditions are going to take a backseat to COVID, you may not have Christmas, you may die alone. If everyone was told that back in March, there would have been uproar. People wouldn't have gone along with it. You can argue that they couldn't foresee this, so let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But if the true reality, if where we are now in November, that reality and what looks to be the case for the foreseeable future, I don't see why any of this is going to change, and that's my concern. But if back in March, when this was initially kicking off, you had been told this is what it's going to be like, and you'd been told the whole story and the other options that haven't been explored, people would not have been happy. But what happened initially is we had 2 weeks to flatten the curve, all this kind of stuff. I think it was 2 weeks here. I remember we were told everything's closing down, and I sort of remembered that there wasn't a hard number on it, but it was kind of like 2 weeks and we'll reevaluate. So I think basically everyone at the time, I don't remember anyone, even with pessimistic expectations, thinking we'd be here in November. So we all thought it was, or anyone I've spoken to and dealt with, thought, it'll be a couple of weeks, whatever, and then we'll go back to normal. And then suddenly we were looking at a 4-month lockdown. And then sort of halfway into that, suddenly it was shorter. And I talked about this in the newsletter. Maybe this is just like they're playing it cautiously. They're sort of evaluating these things as, on the fly and making the decisions based on the available information. That's entirely likely. But if you think about it, it is also possible that they knew very well from the start that it was probably going to be much longer, but they eased us into it and said 2 weeks. So we'll just go with 2 weeks. That seems perfectly reasonable. Even I, as someone who now is in principle very much against all of these lockdowns, I think it's just a load of nonsense. Even I, back then, I was kind of like, I didn't really think much of it. And that's because, like, I didn't foresee all of this level of social engineering and unrest and what this has become. So, is it that we were eased into two weeks and then, suddenly it's 4 months, but we've kind of gotten used to it, and then they cut it short, which seems like, it wasn't that bad. It was supposed to be 4 months, but we've been doing so well that it's actually going to be less. So we end up accepting these things that are totally unacceptable because they are eased into us and sold to us and framed in a certain way, and then, a counter movement is done so that it doesn't seem that bad. So initially it's not too bad, and then it's pretty bad, but then it's cut short. And it's sort of like with when you buy something in a shop. I think that this is research from sales and marketing. If you've got 3 price points, generally people are going to go for the middle one, and you can kind of steer them towards that middle one by framing the cheap one as this budget option, and they don't want to seem cheap, and then you have this premium option, and it's just a bit too much for most people, and then you have this middle option, which now seems reasonable in the context of the two other points. And again, is this all on purpose? Is it somewhat on purpose? Is there a certain degree of, look, we don't really know what's going to happen, but let's cover ourselves. And that's where I would imagine things are. People, they don't really know how it's going to, excuse me, how it's going to pan out. And so they know, as a general rule, if you're a politician, you'll understand that you need to, I think if anyone has a good understanding of social engineering, it's going to be a politician, because that's their job. It's to convince people of things and to get people to vote for them. And it's no secret that many politicians will say one thing and do another. And it's very interesting looking at that and seeing people still defend or still stand by a politician because of the things they say versus the actions that they take. And I won't go on too much of a tangent, but that's what concerns me, when people, they just can't seem to wrap their head around this idea that maybe we're being taken for a ride and taken advantage of. Because they're like, but they care about our health, but they're doing all this. But those are merely their words, and their actions say otherwise. So I want you to consider, again, that ruler analogy. What is the line that should not be crossed, that you think is unreasonable to be crossed? Because, again, in that sort of example of Nazi Germany, and I know when you bring up Nazi Germany and Nazis, people are like, they roll their eyes and they're like, oh yeah, you're really going to talk about the Nazis. And, to be honest, I don't think this ends in genocide. I don't. I mean, to be honest, I'm not going to rule it out because I just don't know. And I feel like that's where people should be mentally. They should be like, look, I don't know. I think it's unlikely, but I don't know. People need to be more comfortable with taking a position of uncertainty, rather than picking a side and picking a team. And it's not being indecisive, it's being open-minded and occupying that space of uncertainty between two polarizing points, which takes more mental effort than to just pick a side. And I think that's a key issue with that. It's why it's very easy for us to pick one side and to just get dug into that point of view. So anyway, I don't think this all ends in a genocide. I'm pretty certain it doesn't. What I would suspect happens is we just become lifelong customers of the pharmaceutical industry, and certain corporations, places like Amazon and that, increase their monopoly on, whatever markets they're in. Small businesses fall apart, and basically you become more and more dependent. Everything becomes more and more centralized, and so single entities, be they pharmaceutical companies, governments, organizations, whatever, have tons of control. So, and I think that's fairly reasonable. That's something we've all seen. Hopefully you've noticed this, that corporations like Amazon are doing very well because everyone's locked at home and they're getting their stuff from Amazon. And to a certain degree, people could choose to not buy it from Amazon, but they also have, they just have this leg up, and you could say that's legitimately earned, whatever. I don't really know how they got to be as successful as they are. Good for them. But the point is that there is no option, because you're supposed to stay at home. You're not allowed to go to the farmer's market. You're not allowed to go to this shop. So you can't support your smaller business. So people are naturally already going to have a tendency to go for things like Amazon, which is why Amazon is so, I'm sure it's part of why Amazon is so powerful and prominent. But even with that, we've been able to choose. We've been able to say, okay, that's fine. I'll get a quicker service, whatever, maybe a better price. But I would like to support this small business, this local business, and that's fine. You have that option. But now, in a lot of cases, we don't have that option, and a lot of these small businesses will shut down, or they have shut down, and they have absolutely no chance of recovering from this. So this is my concern. For small businesses, for individuals who want to do things their own way and should have a right to do things their own way as long as they're not harming others, which they are absolutely not. I think in a lot of cases, the solutions to a lot of our problems are going with, the small local supplier of food, the small, for example, supplement company that does things really, really well versus the big, massive corporations that do lower quality food at better prices. And yeah, regardless of that, the fact that one company would then end up with this monopoly or this, lion's share of the market just means that should they choose to change things, should they choose to update the terms of service, suddenly you can be locked out of participating in society. The other thing then on the more pharmaceutical side of things is that there's talk now of, for example, Ticketmaster, I think, they would be requiring, a vaccine, proof that you've gotten the COVID vaccine in order to attend a concert. And all of this so far is speculative. It's not set in stone as far as I understand. But I feel like that should just be a line that's way past the line. And that's just my sort of standard, but I feel like that should be something that we could all get behind if we take a second to realize that COVID is not the plague. It really isn't. Like it's awful for some people, but there are far better answers, or there appear to be far better answers than a rushed vaccine. And again, if you want to take that vaccine, by all means, but if you don't, then that's your right. You shouldn't be forced to take some sort of pharmaceutical drug, because the standard is with the pharmaceutical drug is that there are going to be harmful side effects. That's what you can expect. There are very few. The medications that come with zero side effects are in the minority. So you should have a right to say, look, I don't want to take that risk. Even if it's a minuscule risk, you should be able to say, I don't want to take that risk. Especially when you have the option of looking after your metabolic health, looking after your health in general, and saying, look, yeah, COVID, it's no joke for some people, but most people have it, don't realize it, and they're grand. And why is that? Well, most people have sufficiently robust health to be able to cope with that, the same way they can cope with most problems. And because there hasn't been any real honest conversation about that side of things, about how much power individuals have to work on their own health, because they're not talking about that, at least not to the appropriate degree, then it's unacceptable to say that a vaccine is going to be the only acceptable remedy and the only way for you to participate in society. So there's talk then as well of you can't take a flight unless you've gotten the vaccine. So there are so many issues with that. They would have to prove that the vaccine is safe across the board. They would have to prove that the vaccine is effective. So not just safe, but effective, so that it legitimately reduces your risk of COVID without causing other risks. And that doesn't tend to happen. That's not, again, the standard is the opposite. That you are going to have knock-on effects, and that there is a certain portion of the population that is going to have significant problems. So that's, and that shouldn't be surprising because of the way pharmaceutical remedies, the sort of framework that they operate under. They operate under this kind of framework of, you've got this singular problem and we need to put in this singular solution to solve it, as if the car is a machine, like a mechanic could see a punctured tire and just replace the tire and everything would be fine. But the human body doesn't work that way. It's not a machine. It's not mechanical. We can't just replace parts and not consider the whole. We can't consider the context that allows certain problems to take hold, and then the immediate ripple effect that any problem in one area has throughout the entire body. That's reality, and we can't ignore that. But most pharmaceutical drugs seem to be developed in a framework that ignores that, and that is, the proof of that is in the fact that you get one drug that solves one problem, but it creates another problem. And so then people end up on another drug to solve the side effect of the first drug, and that creates, a Christmas tree of of dysfunction, because they are not treating the totality of the issue. Because guess what? And maybe this is too cynical, and I really don't think it is. And if you think it's cynical, I'm kind of like at a bit of a loss with this. I'm like, just wake up a bit. But it's better for business to do things this way, because most solutions, and you'll see this across the board, you'll see this is why most people who have real answers when it comes to health do not have significant followings, and you won't find their books on the bestseller lists, because it's so much harder to sell the truth, because the truth is complex and individual, and it requires a ton of effort, and that's just the reality. So it's far better for business to give you one pill for this problem, and then you'll have a couple of other problems, and we'll give you a pill for that, and so on and so forth. It's much easier to have someone on statins for their high cholesterol for the rest of their life than it is to say, hey, stop eating shit, stop eating crappy foods, because I'm out of business then. And that's just reality. And you can accept that without getting too cynical. You can just be like, oh yeah, business is business. They are in the business of providing a solution to a problem. And these are very wealthy companies. These are companies that have, in some cases, been shown to be pretty corrupt. I've got pretty first-hand experience of being on a drug that should never have been on the market, but they simply suppressed the evidence that showed that it was harmful. And many people died of that. And that's not like, that story is one of tons and tons of stories. Like, we shouldn't, like, the immediate starting point when evaluating the pharmaceutical industry should be one of intense skepticism. Like, that's where you should start from. Or, do what you want, but if someone starts from that position of intense skepticism, that should not surprise you. That is a perfectly reasonable starting point, because more often than not, they are demonstrating this level of basically inadequate solutions to the problems that they are, portrayed as being the ultimate suppliers and providers of. But anyway, I'm getting annoyed now. But it's I feel like this idea that people get really touchy again with anything in the rough realm of conspiracy, like, oh no, they couldn't do that. Like, why don't you trust these people? I'm like, why do you trust them? Like, because the burden of proof is on them. With all of this COVID stuff, the people who are skeptical of it, they shouldn't have anything to prove. It's up to you to prove that this is the plague. And you haven't. And it has proven itself. Like, I think a lot of people get that. People in work, you can see that they're like, okay, this is, it's not really that big of a deal. Because when this kicked off initially, we were seeing videos of people in China dropping to the ground, people dead on the streets, people being dragged out of their homes. Like, that's what we were seeing when this was kicking off. And the predictions when it was to hit Ireland, the models that they had, or that this one person had, and we all went with that without fact checking it, it seems, the estimation was that there would be over 100,000 deaths in Ireland. And that's like, with a population of like 4 or 5 million, that's like probably going to be someone you know. Someone you know is probably going to die. And when this was kicking off, I was like, am I going to die? Like, this is serious. Like, am I going to die? Is my fiance going to die? Is someone and my mother, she's in the, the high risk group. Is she going to die? Like, these are very real considerations. And it's not to say that, particularly in the case of my mother, that, I would be so cocky as to say that it's impossible. But in her own, the way she's been behaving with this, she thinks it's a load of nonsense, and she just kind of gets on with it. Rarely wears a mask. She smokes, and she's grand. And maybe that's just that one exception. But again, it was framed in this way from the beginning, and then it just sort of fell flat on its face. Like, it's not what we were sold at the start. And at some point you need to just kind of realize that, or acknowledge it, because I feel like a lot of people, you can't ignore that. Because I still don't know anyone who's had it. And I certainly don't know anyone who's dealt with it, had a bad time with it. And I absolutely don't know of anyone who has passed away with it, touch wood. And, this isn't to be, it's not to say that it's impossible, but it's like, we need to think back to the way this was framed from the start, and the level of restriction and change that has occurred to the world as a result, and the level of knock-on effect to the people who have lost their lives for other reasons, for lack of care, and because of the consequences of our singular focus on COVID, people who've lost their businesses and all that. We need to kind of take a step back and be like, oh, like, this has been, to some extent, a load of nonsense. And I don't know, like, is that hard for you to accept? Are you really resistant to that? Like, do you really think that all of this has been warranted? Like, all of these additional costs have been warranted? Because if you consider, like, since when do we care so much about people's health? Like, we don't. You don't even care about your own health. Not fully. I don't, like, if we want to be sort of absolutist and really particular about it, like, I don't 100% care about my health, because there are certain things that I still do that aren't in the best interest of my health, but I feel like they're acceptable and they're not life-threatening, so I deal with the consequences. If you choose to have a few drinks every now and then, if we want to be really specific about it, that's an indication that you don't 100% absolutely care about your health, because you're doing things that have no merit, essentially. Or that, the merits that you get from those things could be gotten through healthier means. So you take certain liberties with your health. And that's fine. By all means, do that. Please do that. I want you to live the life that you want to live. But the point is, we don't care about our health. Like, not to the point of shutting down the world and telling people what they can and can't do, and forcing people to lose their businesses. You really don't, and I don't like, it's a load of nonsense. So we don't care about people's health. We let people smoke, we let people drink, we let people eat crappy foods because that's their right. And before, you could say, well, these aren't infectious issues. But again, like, that's if you're solely going to consider that having COVID is absolutely going to infect someone else, and you take out the individual context of people being able to combat it, which is most people. Again, most people get it and don't even realize it because they are able to combat it, because it is not the plague, and because it affects people in fairly predictable ways. It doesn't happen to healthy 20-year-old people. And you might have read a story, in a newspaper where they'll present some 20-year-old who was by all accounts healthy, but I guarantee that they were not healthy because they probably were eating a load of nonsense and were just, it's just a load of propaganda basically. And people not understanding what health actually is. But anyway, the point is we don't care about people's health. And you shouldn't expect anyone to care about your health, because even the doctor that you're paying is going to clock out at 5 o'clock and get on with his life. It's not their business to truly, fully care about your health. And they shouldn't. It's not sustainable. You can't care about someone's health more than they do. And so if you don't care about your health that much, look after yourself, do what you can. And that's the best way that you can improve the health of the world, is be as healthy as you can possibly be. And then you'll be as healthy as you can possibly be, and this other person will all be as healthy as we can possibly be. And from there, we're in a better position to help others. And, you can mix in a certain amount of just, common decency, which I'm pretty sure we had prior to COVID. You didn't go coughing in people's faces. I've never seen anything atrocious before this time where I was like, man, that person was really careless. Someone could have caught something from, their action. That person just coughed or sneezed on a piece of fruit in the supermarket, and someone could have walked along, picked that up and eaten that and died. Like, I've never seen that, and I'm not seeing that now. But anyway, I'm going off on tangents. But the point is that we don't really care about people's health. And I don't see why the government cares about your health outside of the context of making it seem like they're doing something or making it seem like they care. And, you can demonstrate this by the simple fact that, let's step back to March. We've got this global pandemic. Over 100,000 people in Ireland could die, and across the world, millions and millions, basically far more than have actually been affected. Basically, what it was projected to be from the very beginning. And okay, so you've got this overwhelming, seemingly insurmountable crisis ahead of you. The natural thing you're going to do, in 2020, with all the things that we have, all the modern, arguably is more advanced than we've ever been, you're going to throw every possible solution at the problem. You're going to say, look, we're going to give you the best medical care possible. We're going to restrict certain movements because, yes, it is possible that you're carrying it and you'll pass it on to someone else who's more vulnerable and they will get sick as a result of your actions. Yes, that's possible. So we're going to take some steps there to restrict that. What else? We're going to if we're going to restrict that, why don't we restrict access to alcohol? Why don't we restrict access to crappy foods, vegetable oils, and all the nonsense, maybe 80% of what you find in a supermarket? Why aren't we doing that? We shouldn't do that, because if you want to, it's one thing that annoys me about that we have a sugar tax here, and it's like, leave me alone. If I want to eat sugar, let me eat sugar and deal with the consequences, and the consequences aren't what you think anyway, because you're an idiot and you don't know anything. But let me live my life. Let me make the decision to do this. And, when you have that standard, of personal responsibility, people accept that when they're going to take certain actions, that there are going to be certain risks. And that is a better place to start from. What has happened, like I said, I have no reason to believe that they care about our health because they didn't throw every possible solution at this. There are tremendously simple things that they could have done from the start, especially as we were in spring heading into summer. They could have said, look, you have a tremendous amount of control when it comes to your health. You have the most amount of control when it comes to your health. So, get some fresh air. Get outside. Get some sunlight. Connect with people. Okay? Maybe don't lick their eyeballs, but be around people. Talk. And you can, like, not face them. You cannot talk into their face and eyes. But social connection. Get some exercise. Do all of these things that are well established, uncontroversial. These aren't like fringy things. Very simple things. Get people sleeping well. Get people moving. Get people laughing, having fun, enjoying their lives, feeling supported, feeling part of a community. All of these things. And we can still do everything else that we've done. But no mention of that. You know, little pieces here and there, particularly later on, not so much at the start. None of that. And if that isn't clear evidence that they don't give a crap about your health, and they're not making a full effort at what is, you know, what was framed as the biggest crisis the world has, you know, the modern age has ever seen. You know, if that isn't proof to you that they don't care and that they're only doing things within the realm of what suits them, then I don't know, maybe you're an idiot. I don't mean to be rude, but like I at some point I'm not sure how you reach certain people on this topic, and so maybe you need tough love, but yeah, the point is, if you truly care about this problem, you're going to throw every solution at it. But what they've done is do things that only sort of suit what they do. So we have a large pharmaceutical industry in Ireland, and in the world, the pharmaceutical industry is very powerful, very wealthy. So the solution is a pharmaceutical solution. The solution isn't a dietary solution. You know, there isn't the same amount of money in that. There isn't the same centralization of resources in that. You know, a lot of these things you can technically grow for yourself. You know, if you're on a farm, you could take care of all of this stuff yourself without a corporation selling it to you. You could be completely self-sustaining. And guess what? A company that makes a lot of money isn't going to make money from that. So why would they recommend that you do that? They're not going to recommend that you do that. They're going to recommend the thing that they can offer you, that they have a monopoly on. You know, I don't have the means to create a vaccine in my kitchen. I don't think. Maybe I do. But I don't think I do. But I have the means to grow food. I have the means to get outdoors. I have the means to move. I have the means to express myself, be creative, to, you know, do all of these other healthy things that no one has a monopoly on and no one could realistically have a monopoly on. So, yeah, it shouldn't be surprising that the only solutions we've gotten are solutions that they can monopolize and that give them more control over individuals. And I know that's just reality. Like, if you're in denial about that, I don't know what to tell you. And again, people will get a bit kind of squeamish around that. They're like, oh, you know, well, it's not some big conspiracy. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Like, get the whole conspiracy talk out of it. Get the whole allergy to conspiracy out of your mindset. Like, it shouldn't be controversial that people who have, and it shouldn't be surprising that people who have such power and influence might want to steer things in their favor, because if anyone can, they can, at least to some extent. So, anyway, that's sort of to frame why I think we're going in the wrong direction and why I think we've gone too far. And I can't buy this idea that it's all being done in good faith. Like, there are a number of people who have just outright said, like, this is a tremendous opportunity for, I'm paraphrasing, a tremendous opportunity for social engineering to reshape the world in a way that we want to shape it. And guess what? That way doesn't favor independence and individuality. It's all collectivist. It's all centralized control over things, which, again, if that's what you believe in, if that's what you want, that's fine. You can join a commune, you can all share whatever. You can do that in this certain way. You can buy everything from Amazon. You can have some powerful person tell you how to live your life. By all means, do that. The fundamental issue, is I should have a choice not to, because I'm not harming anyone in choosing not to. Because if you want to say that I am harming you by not living this way, I am harming you by not getting a vaccine, I am harming you by going into a shop without a mask, if you are going to stand by that statement, then we need to have a conversation about the foods that you eat, the thoughts that you have, and the things that go into your body. So if you're going to police me on this small selection of things and say, well, you can't do this because you're not willing to do that, then I can say, if we want to be consistent, if we want to have standards, then I can say, well, now, okay, you can no longer drink alcohol, you can no longer eat this crappy food, you can no longer get a poor night's sleep, you need to live your life in this way. But that's ludicrous. That's the far end of the ruler, totalitarian authoritarianism, 1984 style stuff where every little detail is rationed and controlled and you have no independence. And I realize that it seems like a far, far step away from that. We're very far from that on the ruler. But it's about the principle and the standards, the principles and standards that you have. Because if you're willing to just go along with these arbitrary things, and you're willing to say that, well, I can require you to do this, but I don't have to do all these other things. If you're going to have these inconsistent, basically these double standards, then it's always just a slow incremental step towards more and more control. And it's that analogy of the boiling frog. Put the frog in the water, and if you boil it slowly, it won't notice and it'll die. And I don't know if that's actually accurate, but the point is it's if you were to throw a frog into boiling water, it would panic and try to jump out. But if you put it in room temperature and you slowly boil it, it will die. And same thing with that Nazi analogy. If everything had been so obvious from the start, then we all would have revolted. But it was small incremental things, and things that are so small that you're kind of like, it's just a mask. It's just this. It's just that. And there's usually always like a certain degree of truth to it. It is just a mask. It is just a mask. It's not that big of a deal. I get when people are like, just wear the mask. Yeah, why not just wear the mask? Because in most cases, I've talked about there are certain downsides about, wearing a mask for long periods of time, or how long that is individual. But, there are certain downsides. But I get that, it's not that big of a deal. It's not about that. It's about the principle and why we accept certain things. So why do you agree with that? Is it that you've paused and really assessed it and then looked at all the research on masks? And I guarantee that most people haven't, myself included. When they brought in the mask mandates, I didn't say, okay, let me read all the research on masks and I'll do an informed individual decision. You're like, well, no, I'll wear a mask. I'll get on with it. I don't want to, I don't want to cause any trouble. I don't want to stand out. That's certainly a thing for me. I want to pass under the radar. I want to be the gray man. I want to go unnoticed. And not wearing a mask kind of gets in the way of that. And so you just go along with it. And so it's just a mask. And soon enough, it's going to be just a vaccine. And I guarantee the downsides of the vaccine will be either hidden from you or severely downplayed. So when someone has a bad reaction, they'll be able to say, no, it's unrelated, that was something else. And you'll likely start seeing a number of people. This is what happens with the anti-vax movement. People don't want to have an honest conversation about the potential, and documented in the inserts for the vaccines. People don't want to talk about the few times when it goes horribly wrong, We don't want to talk about that. We just want to say, you're anti-vax, you're a bad person, you're anti-science, and all this nonsense. We don't want to have that conversation. And when this happens, when they start pushing for a mandatory vaccine, some people are going to have, chances are some people are going to have negative reactions. Reactions that aren't worth it, because there are better ways to protect yourself against this virus that happen to also equip you with better health and more independence and more ability to respond to the world around you. So people are going to have bad reactions. Chances are, just statistically speaking, certain people are going to have bad reactions, and they're going to possibly speak out, and that's going to be belittled and said, no, they're just conspiracy theorists. That was an underlying condition, and suddenly we want to talk about underlying conditions. When it comes to COVID, everything's a COVID death, even though the person had terminal cancer, and that's, unrelated underlying conditions, they're unrelated. Everything is COVID. But now they'll just flip the script and you'll just go along with it because we're just going along with it. Because, we just go along with it. And it's that simple. Because we don't have the time or the energy or the know-how to really evaluate these things. And it's easier to just go along with it. And it's a slow, incremental loss of individuality, of just personal freedom. So, yeah, where do you draw the line? If you think it's acceptable to restrict, to say that someone needs this vaccine to get on a flight, why do you think that's acceptable? If you think we should do that, should we require that everyone who steps on a plane has a certain level of health? Do we stop obese people from getting on a plane? Do we stop smokers from getting on the plane? They're not going to be smoking on the plane, but they are smokers, and so their body has suffered the effects of smoking. So their health is impaired in some way. Do we restrict them because they are going to be on average more likely to be infected, potentially more likely to pass on the infection? So why is the vaccine this ultimate thing? Why can't I have really, really good health? And that's it's not a vaccine, but it's my vaccine, so to speak. It's my... And again, it's none of your business. It's none of your business what I do with my health. But, why can't that be my thing? I say, okay, you want to go the vaccine route? Fair enough. Do that. Maybe you'll get away with it. You'll probably get away with it. Maybe you won't. But I won't. Because I'm doing all these other things. I'm trying to get good sleep. I'm eating well. I'm looking after my health. I'm making a concerted effort for my health. And that's that. But, we don't think about that. And why? Why aren't we thinking about that? Because if you're going to try to police people's actions, you need to think about that. And you need to have a good reason. And the only way, so I say, what are your standards? What are your principles? And I think that the truth is probably the most important thing that you stand for. So, and you can use this with anything. So mask mandates. Okay, mask mandates. What is the truth when it comes to masks? How effective are they? What are the knock-on effects? What are the different kinds of masks? What are, how does the mask interact with different individuals? So, and different environments. So the moisture in the air, the bacteria in the air. Am I in a house with mold? All these things. And I I understand, I'm not bothered doing that. It's a lot of time. And most people won't have time to do that. And that's fine. But again, if you're willing to assert this control over people, and you're not really willing to like figure this out for yourself. You're ultimately just kind of going along with it. And you're like, oh, well, everyone says, and it's not even everyone, but the people that I'm supposed to trust say wear a mask, and so I'm just going to wear a mask, and eventually I'm going to get annoyed at the people who aren't wearing a mask. And I don't really know why. I don't know anything about health. I don't know anything about my health, and I certainly don't care about my own health really, because I still drink, I still get crappy sleep, I still get a takeaway every week, and I don't exercise and all this. But I'm going to be mad at you for not wearing a mask, and I'm going to be superior to you for not wearing a mask. And, it's just a mask. You can do this with anything. In our case, it happens to be masks. Like, I feel like if it had just been spun a different way, if the same people who pushed for this, the people who are able to create social change, people of influence, had said we need to wear goggles, now it could be goggles. We could be anti-mask, anti-goggles, pro-goggles, just wear the damn goggles. and you should think about that. Like, right now, would you be militant about goggles if that had just been the thing that was said to you? And there's a funny meme, but and it's a bit ridiculous, but like, they're kind of making this point of like, if the the chief person in charge of this who's telling us what to do had told you to stick a finger up your butt to prevent catching COVID, you'd be doing it. And there are certain people who would be doing that. And maybe that's, it's a bit too far, and it seems, people might raise an eye, might question that a bit more, and I understand that. But, the point is, why have you adopted myself included, why have we adopted these things? And that's the question you need to answer. Why? And at what point is too much? Because the trend at the moment is the world is being pushed more towards centralized control over people, and people have less independence. People have less options. And corporations who are already very wealthy and already very influential are profiting, and their monopolies on their markets are increasing. And that's bad for the small business person. Like, I know a lot of people have somewhat enjoyed this lockdown because they get to work from home, and that's fair enough. But they just don't get that, like, this is the end of the world for some people. Like, all of their hard work, and essentially it's like it's for nothing, like, or it's not proportionate to any benefit that we may have gotten, and I'm not even certain that we've gotten any benefit from this. So yeah, consider that. Where's the line? Because it's a very slow, slippery slope, and it might take a long time. And again, I don't think this ends in genocide, but I think it ends with people, us becoming lifetime customers of pharmaceutical companies that don't care about our health. That, they're companies, they care about profit, they care about, having a monopoly on the market, and they will have us as lifetime customers. And we will likely have side effects from that, and they will have greater profits from us having to pay for the new solutions that they provide for us for the the problems that they've created. And that shouldn't be too hard to see, because I feel like that's not, that's a very distinct possibility. And maybe it's very incremental. Maybe it's just like, most people can still get away with not doing it. Maybe it's like we're not overtly forced to, but it's like, well, you can't come into this shop, or you can't get a flight, and people will get by. Like, if I never get to take a flight again in my life, well, I guess that's it. And I can still live, I can still do many things. I don't need to be able to take a flight. So maybe it's less severe, but it's little things like that, and then it just becomes normal. Then you're the weirdo who can't take a flight because you don't want to get this shot. So yeah, there you go. Let me check my notes. The question is, again, think about that ruler. Think about, at the 0 point is just pure freedom. You live your life exactly how you choose to, as long as it doesn't hurt others. And then the opposite end is 1984 George Orwell level of control over your life. And we're somewhere along that ruler, and we are sliding in the direction of, the Orwellian or Brave New World might be more accurate. But we're sliding towards that world, and I don't think people really want that. If they think about it, and maybe you do, and again, you can be free to do that as long as other people aren't forced to. But you really need to consider, where's the line? How much is too much? Why are you okay with the mask? And that's fine if you're okay with the mask. Just believe what you believe and stand by it and know why you believe it. But just know when it becomes too much. And I encourage you to use the truth as a guiding principle, because that way, no matter what is imposed, you'll always be able to evaluate and say, okay, what are the merits of this, and what is ultimately the truth. And again, for example, the thing with masks, the truth is that we are individuals, and masks will affect individuals individually, and it's not even clear that they are this perfect solution to the problem. Therefore, the benefits don't always outweigh the costs, so it should not be mandated. A basic, most fundamental human function, that is breathing, your most vital human function, breathing, should not be regulated by others. So that's the truth, or I would argue that's the truth. And so you go from there. And that doesn't mean that you don't wear a mask or that you shouldn't wear a mask or whatever. But it means that you have this standard to say, okay, look, we shouldn't mandate these things. We shouldn't force people to do things. We can compel them. We can appeal to their reason. But we can't force these people. Because if we're willing to force these things, then why aren't we willing to force any of these other things? And I guarantee people don't want to be forced to stop drinking alcohol. That's something in Ireland, like if we had closed down we closed down the pubs, but if we had closed down the off licenses and what you would call in the US a liquor store, I don't know where people are listening from, but if we had made it impossible to buy alcohol, people would have been probably would have been riots over that. So yeah, what do you stand for? What is acceptable, and why is it acceptable in this context but not this other context? And if your only reason is because, I'm just kind of going along with it, then that's a problem. That's a sure way for us to continue to slide towards this Orwellian future. Now, if you understand that, you can say, well, look, the mask is this easy thing. Don't think it should be mandated, but we should be encouraged to wear it, whatever, fine. And you understand that, and you have these well thought out reasons, and you have a very clear line that you will not cross, then we can, then that's good. Then we can be more confident that things aren't going to degenerate and slide down into authoritarianism. So there you go. That's this week's podcast. I hope it makes sense. I hope it gave you food for thought, because ultimately it's all about the way we think about all these things, because the solutions are out there. There's nothing new under the sun. You just need to know how to navigate it, and that comes from thinking critically and being able to think. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time. Have a good day.